The night sky above the colony was filled with pale lights from broken street lamps. The market stood alive with voices, the smell of fried roots, and the glow of neon signs that flickered in tired colors. Merchants shouted, buyers bargained, children pulled on their mothers' arms, asking for sweets they could not afford. Among the crowd walked a thin alien woman with two small children. Her steps slow, her eyes lowered. Her clothes were worn and patched in many places, and her face showed the lines of many sleepless nights. She was a single mother, left alone after the war took her husband, and every day had become a struggle between dignity and hunger. Her children held her hands tightly, their stomachs empty, their faces pale. She had saved a few credits, counting them again and again in her head, whispering small prayers that it would be enough for bread and a little soup. Hope was thin, but hunger was cruel, and she could not let them go to sleep with nothing again. She stopped at a stall where warm bread steamed under the cold air. The smell made her children's eyes widen with longing, and she could not turn away. Her fingers shook as she handed the credits to the cashier, a young human man who worked late shifts when others had gone home. He scanned the food, his eyes tired but kind, and for a moment it seemed normal. But when she reached into her small pouch for the last coins, her heart sank. She did not have enough. Silence seemed to fall on her world, though the market still roared with voices around her. Her children looked at her, their smiles fading. Her hands trembled as she pushed the food back across the counter, whispering that she could not take it. The shame was heavy, burning her cheeks as if everyone was watching, though most ignored her like she was invisible. The human cashier's eyes softened as he saw her desperate act. He saw how the children swallowed hard, their eyes fixed on the bread they could not taste. He had seen many faces pass by his stall, but this one struck his heart. Her pride was breaking, and yet she still tried to protect her children from despair. "Wait," he said quietly, his voice cutting through her shame. She froze, not daring to look at him, afraid he would scold her. Instead, he gently pushed the bread and the small packet of soup back toward her. "Keep it," he whispered. "I'll cover the rest." Her eyes widened in shock. The children gasped softly. No stranger had ever spoken to her like that, not since the war had left her with nothing. She shook her head quickly, whispering that she could not take charity, but the human's gaze was steady, calm, and firm. He was not giving her charity, he was giving her dignity back. Behind them, a few people noticed and began to whisper. Some mocked, saying the alien mother was pretending to be weak to get free food. Others stared with curiosity, wondering why a human would care about her at all, but the cashier did not look at them. His attention stayed only on her and the hungry children. He slid the bread across the counter once more, his hand firm. "Your children need to eat," he said, his tone stronger now. "Don't return what they deserve." The mother's eyes filled with tears. She tried to hide. Her children clung to her robe, whispering if they could really take it. Her heart pounded, torn between pride and need. But when she saw her children's eyes, bright, hopeful, desperate, she finally let her hand rest on the bread. The human cashier gave a small nod as if telling her it was the right choice. For him, it was just one night, one act. But for her, it was a moment that would burn in memory. The night when someone, a stranger from another world, refused to let her children go hungry. She whispered a soft "thank you," her voice breaking. The words felt too small for the weight of his kindness, but the human only smiled faintly, brushing it off as if it was nothing. He rang up the next customer, as though this act of quiet rebellion against cruelty was just another part of his job. Yet the mother knew it was not nothing. Her heart carried the warmth of that moment, a light in her endless struggle. She left the market with her children, holding the bread close, their faces shining in the night. And though shadows still ruled her life, one human's kindness had opened a door to hope. The market always carried voices, but the whispers after that night were different. What the human cashier had done spread quietly, carried from one mouth to another, not as loud news but as murmurs drifting through the stalls. "Did you see him cover her food?" one merchant said with raised brows. "A human of all people helping her," another scoffed. Some laughed, others frowned, but a few nodded in silence, wondering if kindness still lived in such a world. The alien mother walked home with her children that night, clutching the bread as if it were treasure. Her little ones ate quickly, their laughter filling the small, broken home like music. For the first time in weeks, she watched them fall asleep with full stomachs, and tears slid down her face, not from pain this time, but from relief. Yet her heart was uneasy. She feared rumors. She feared people would mock her for accepting help. Still, her thoughts always returned to the human cashier, his steady gaze, his calm voice, and the way he made her feel less invisible. At the stall the next evening, the cashier stood behind the counter as always, scanning items with tired hands, but something inside him had changed. He found himself watching the faces more carefully, seeing the stories written in their eyes, the struggles hidden under quiet words. He had covered the woman's cost once, but the image of her trembling hand trying to return food replayed again and again in his mind. Why had he spoken to? At night, when so many others had passed without a word, he could not answer, except that it felt wrong to stay silent. Some customers greeted him with smirks, calling him the soft one. Others avoided his eyes, not wanting to be seen by someone who noticed too much. But among the crowd, a few gave him small nods of respect, as if acknowledging something rare. He ignored the stares and continued working, yet a quiet fire burned inside him. Maybe, just maybe, small acts could still matter in a place that had forgotten compassion. The alien mother returned 2 nights later, not to beg, not to ask, but to face him. Her children clung to her side, shy but curious. She stepped forward, her hands shaking, and placed a folded piece of cloth on the counter. It was hand-woven, with careful patterns, though the fabric was old. "This is all I can give," she whispered. "You helped us when no one would. Please take it." The cashier froze, staring at the cloth. It was not valuable in credits, but it carried weight far heavier. It was her pride, her gratitude, her way of saying she was not only a beggar. He shook his head slowly, sliding the cloth back toward her. "No," he said softly. "Feed your children, not my pride." Her eyes widened, her lips parted as if words had failed her. Around them, a few merchants paused to watch, waiting for the human to mock her, but he never did. Instead, he smiled faintly, as if her thanks was more than enough. For a long moment, she just stood there, her throat tight with emotion. Before finally bowing her head, she gathered her children and walked away, clutching them tightly, her heart beating with something she had not felt in years: hope. The whispers grew stronger after that. Some accused her of using pity to survive, their words sharp and cruel. "She'll just beg again tomorrow," they said. Others spoke of the cashier, mocking him for being too soft, too foolish to waste his own credits on strangers. But in the shadows of those cruel voices, a few softer whispers also spread. "Maybe kindness is not weakness," one voice said quietly. "Maybe we have all forgotten what it means to care." The human cashier heard the mocking laughs but paid them no mind. He had lived long enough to know that cruelty was easy, but kindness took courage. Every time he thought of the children's wide eyes shining with hope as they clutched their bread, his chest warmed. It was worth every coin, worth every insult. Late that night, as the market closed and the neon lights dimmed, he sat alone by the counter. He thought about how small his act was in the grand weight of the universe. One loaf of bread, one packet of soup, against a galaxy full of hunger. But then he remembered the way the children had smiled, and he knew, sometimes one small light was enough to push back the dark. In her home, the mother whispered to her children about the human. She told them, "Not everyone will turn away from you. Remember this night. Remember his face." The children nodded sleepily, holding the breadcrumbs as if they were jewels. For them, the human cashier was no longer just a worker at a stall. He was someone who had seen them when the world had turned away. And so the whispers of kindness continued, some cruel, some admiring, but all carrying one truth, one human, one act had shifted something unseen. The market, once only a place of hunger and shadows, now carried the faint sound of hope, carried by whispers in the night. The days that followed felt heavy for the alien mother. Even with the bread in her children's bellies, even with the moment of kindness that had lit her heart, life did not suddenly grow easier. Every sunrise brought the same question: how to survive the next night, how to keep her children safe. The colony streets were not gentle. They were cruel with whispers, cold with indifference, filled with people who stepped over the weak as if they were part of the ground. She rose early each day, her body aching from restless sleep, and searched for work. She offered her hands to clean, to lift, to carry, but doors closed before her. Some said her kind was not trustworthy. Others said they could not waste coins on a widow with children. Each refusal was a stone added to the weight she carried. Yet she forced herself forward, because hunger did not wait. At night, she returned to her small shelter, a room with walls that leaked when it rained. Her children would run to her, their eyes hopeful, asking if she had brought food. Sometimes she had scraps, sometimes only water. and she would smile through the pain, pretending it was enough. Her children were young, but not blind. They knew her smiles hid tears, and they whispered to each other when she turned away, wishing they could help her carry the burden. The memory of the human cashier stayed with her, not just because of the bread, but because of the way he looked at her, not with pity, not with scorn, but with respect. That look haunted her, warmed her, and frightened her all at once. She had been invisible for so long, reduced to nothing but whispers of shame, and yet in that single act, someone had reminded her she was still a mother, still a person. But the world around her was not kind. Rumors began to crawl through the market. Some merchants sneered when she walked by, whispering that she was begging for more food. Others mocked her children, saying they were being taught to survive through pity. Every word pierced her heart, but she kept her head low, holding her children's hands tightly, reminding herself they were all that mattered. One night, when her children were asleep, she sat alone, staring at the cloth she had tried to give the cashier. It was all she had left from her husband, who had woven it during a season of peace before the war. She had wanted to give it to the human, to repay him, to show that she still had dignity, but he had refused, telling her to feed her children first. Her hands shook as she held it close, whispering her husband's name, wondering if he would have been proud of her, or if he would have wept at how far they had fallen. The burden was not just hunger, it was memory. She carried the weight of a love lost, of promises broken by war, of a life that had turned into survival. Every day she fought not only against empty stomachs, but against the voices inside her that said she had failed. Yet when she thought of the human's firm voice telling her, "Don't return what they deserve," she felt a small spark pushing against the darkness. Meanwhile, the cashier continued his work. He noticed her absence some days, wondering if she had eaten, wondering if her children still smiled. He had not meant to become involved, but his mind returned to her often. He thought of how proud she had looked when refusing pity, and how heavy her steps had been when she carried her food away. He knew that kind of weight. He had seen it before in war refugees, in miners with broken backs, in those who lived at the edge of survival. And yet she carried it with quiet strength, never breaking in front of her children, never letting them see how close she was to collapse. Her burden was invisible to many, but not to him. He saw it in the way her shoulders bent, in the way her hands trembled when she counted coins, in the way she kept her voice steady for her children, even when she wanted to scream. It stirred something in him, something he could not name. He had grown used to being invisible too, a cashier no one remembered, a human among aliens who rarely cared for his presence. But now, through her struggle, he felt his own life had meaning, as if noticing her burden made his own days less empty. One evening, as the market lights dimmed and she stood at the edge of a stall with only 2 coins, he saw her hesitate. She counted again and again, wisp, airing numbers under her breath, and then quietly placed the coins down for a handful of grain. It was not enough for her children, not nearly. Her lips trembled, but she forced a smile when her children looked at her. The cashier's heart clenched. He wanted to step forward again, but he knew too many eyes were watching, waiting to sneer. Still, as she left, he whispered to himself, "She carries too much," and he promised silently that he would not let her break. The mother's burden was heavy, but in its weight grew a story that neither she nor the human could yet see. A story where suffering and kindness would collide, changing both of them forever. The next week passed with heavy days and long nights. The mother tried once again to find work, knocking at doors, standing in lines, offering her hands for any task, but the colony was unforgiving, and most turned her away with cold eyes. Still, she carried on, because her children needed her to keep moving. Her stomach often stayed empty while she fed them first, her body weak but her spirit refusing to collapse. The memory of the human cashier would not leave her mind. Every time she saw her children eat, she thought of his voice telling her not to return what they deserved. It had been such a small moment for him perhaps, but for her it was like a lifeline thrown into stormy waters. She had been drowning in silence, and suddenly someone had reached out, reminding her that kindness was not yet dead. One evening, as the market lights flickered against the dusty air, she gathered courage. She held the hand-woven cloth in her arms, folded neatly, her heart pounding as she made her way to the stall. Her children followed, quiet but curious, sensing that something important was about to happen. The cashier was there, as always, his expression calm, his hands steady as he passed goods across the counter. But when his eyes lifted and saw her approaching, a flicker of recognition softened his face. She stopped in front of him, bowing her head slightly, her hands trembling as she placed the folded cloth before him. "This is for you," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the noise of the market. You gave my children food when I could not. You gave us hope when no one else would. Please take this. It is all I have left to give." The human looked down at the cloth, noticing the careful weaving, the faded but delicate patterns that spoke of care and history. It was not wealth, not in the eyes of the merchants who measured value in coins and trade, but he saw it for what it truly was: her gratitude, her dignity, her heart poured into threads. Slowly, he shook his head, sliding it back toward her. "No," he said gently, his voice carrying a quiet firmness. "Feed your children, not my pride." The mother's lips parted, her eyes wide with shock. She had expected him to accept, to at least take it as repayment. But his refusal was not rejection, it was protection. He would not strip her of the little she still owned, the one piece of her past she still clung to. For a long moment she stood frozen, her throat tight with unspoken words, before her eyes filled with tears. Around them, people paused to watch. Merchants leaned forward with mocking smiles. They wanted to see her humiliated, wanted to whisper later that she had tried to buy favor with scraps, but their sneers died when the human met her gaze with quiet respect. He did not laugh, he did not pity, he simply honored her. And in that silence the cruel voices lost their strength. Her children tugged at her robe, whispering, "Mama, can we keep it?" She nodded faintly, gathering the cloth with shaking hands, holding it close as if it were more precious than ever. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Thank you." The words too small for the weight of her heart, but the human only gave a faint smile and returned to his work, his silence louder than any speech. As she left the stall, whispers followed her again. Some were cruel, calling her desperate, but others were softer now, thoughtful. They had seen how the human treated her, how he refused to take her last treasure, and for the first time some began to wonder if perhaps kindness could not be mocked so easily. That night, in her small shelter, she sat with her children by the weak fire. She unfolded the cloth again, running her fingers across its threads, remembering her husband's hands weaving it years ago. For the first time in so long, she smiled with real warmth. The human had not only fed her children, he had defended her pride without words. And that was a gift greater than food, greater than coins. The children asked again and again about the man. "Why did he help us?" they whispered, their eyes wide with wonder. She told them softly, "Because not all hearts are cold. Some still remember how to care." The children nodded, and in their small hearts, a seed of trust began to grow. A belief that kindness was not only a story from the past. Meanwhile, the cashier sat alone in the quiet after the market closed. His hands rested on the counter, his mind replaying her trembling voice. He had refused the cloth, but the image of her gratitude weighed on him. He had not done it for thanks. He had not done it for recognition. But in that moment, he realized how deeply the world had forgotten what it meant to simply care. Her gift was not the cloth, it was the reminder that compassion still mattered. And so the story of one human and one mother began to grow, not in loud speeches or grand deeds, but in the small exchanges that carried more power than war. For while the colony was filled with shadows, a new whisper had begun to rise. The whisper of gratitude, the whisper of hope, the whisper that maybe, just maybe, things could still change. The colony market was never silent, its heart always beating with voices, bargains, and footsteps. But behind those sounds lived another rhythm, one made of whispers, sharper than knives. The story of the human cashier and the alien mother had spread too far, and now it carried not only curiosity, but cruelty. Some merchants sneered when she walked by with her children. "She lives on pity," they muttered, loud enough for her to hear. Others laughed, saying, "Wait, soon she'll beg again, it's all she knows." The words fell heavy, pressing on her already tired spirit. Yet she walked forward with her head bowed, her hands gripping her children's tightly. Her children did not always understand the meaning of the words, but they understood the tones. They knew the laughter was pointed, cruel, meant to wound. They clung closer to her robe, whispering if they had done something wrong. She shook her head softly, telling them no, telling them to be brave, but inside her chest the shame burned like fire. The human cashier noticed it too. From his counter he watched how people's eyes followed her, how sneers rose as she passed. He clenched his jaw, his hands tightening against the counter. He wanted to shout, to silence them all, but he knew their cruelty would only grow louder. Still the anger inside him grew, building like a storm with nowhere to break. One evening, as she approached his stall, two merchants blocked her path. Their smiles were wide, cruel, their voices dripping with mockery. "Where are your free meals today?" one asked. "Perhaps you'll cry again." Maybe the human will cover your shame, the other added. Her children pressed into her sides, their eyes wide with fear. Her lips trembled, but she stayed silent, trying to pass them without sparking more cruelty. The cashier saw it all, and something inside him snapped. He stepped from behind his counter, his voice steady but sharp. "Enough," he said, the word cutting through the air. The merchants turned, laughing. "Ah, the hero speaks." But his gaze was firm, unwavering. "If kindness offends you," he said slowly, "then it is your heart that is broken, not hers." The market grew still for a moment, people pausing to listen. The merchants scoffed, shaking their heads, but their laughter carried less weight now. The mother stood frozen, her breath caught, her children staring at the human with wide eyes. He had not only helped them in silence, he had now spoken aloud, standing against the cruelty others used as sport. After that day, the whispers grew louder. Some called the cashier foolish, saying he risked his job for a stranger. Others mocked him openly, calling him the beggar's friend. But there were also voices that softened, that carried wonder. Why would he defend her? Some asked. Why risk himself? Others whispered. And though no one had answers, the seeds of doubt had been planted in their cruelty. The mother, however, felt the weight of fear. She knew the merchants had power, and if they chose to blacklist her, she would have no place left to buy food. Her heart raced with worry each night, wondering if her children would starve because of the kindness shown to her. She wept quietly when they were asleep, torn between gratitude and dread. What if she had brought ruin upon the man who had helped her? What if his small act had cost him everything? The cashier, sitting alone at the end of his shifts, wrestled with the same fear. He had spoken without thinking of the cost, only of the cruelty he could not allow. But now he wondered if the market would turn on him, if the manager would demand silence or dismissal. He looked at his calloused hands, remembering the war he had survived, the struggles he had endured, and told himself, if I lose for kindness, then shine so be it. The cruelty did not stop, but it began to divide. For every sneer, there was a curious glance. For every cruel whisper, there was a softer question. And the mother felt it too, walking through the market with her head held a little higher. The shadows still surrounded her, but in the middle of them stood one light, the human cashier. And in his presence, the cruelty seemed less sharp, less endless. Still, she knew the danger was real. The merchants would not forgive being challenged so openly. And somewhere in the crowd, plans were already forming, plans to make her suffer, plans to silence the human who dared to care. That night, as she tucked her children into their thin blankets, she kissed their foreheads softly. Be strong, she whispered, her voice trembling with both fear and hope. And across the colony, the human sat in the dim light of his small room, whispering his own promise. No matter what comes, I will not turn away. The shadows of cruelty had gathered, but in the heart of those shadows, a storm was rising, a storm born not of hatred, but of defiance, and it would soon test them both. The air in the market had grown heavy. The whispers that once carried curiosity now carried warning, and the merchants' eyes followed the human cashier like predators. They had power in numbers, in influence, and in the cruel games they played with the weak. And now they felt challenged, humiliated by the way a single human had dared to defend a widow and her children. The mother sensed it too. Every step she took into the market filled her with dread. Would she be stopped again, mocked again, turned away with no food for her children? Her heart pounded each time she approached the stall, afraid her presence would only bring more trouble for the man who had helped her. Yet she could not keep away, for the stall had become more than a place of food. It had become a place of hope. The cashier noticed her hesitation, the way her eyes darted around before she spoke. He understood without words. The cruelty was pressing. Harder now, but inside him something refused to bend. He had seen war. He had seen men die for less, and he had sworn to himself never again to stay silent when injustice stood before him. One evening, as the neon lights flickered weakly, the merchants came forward. 3 of them stood before his counter, their arms crossed, their voices cold. You think you are a hero? One sneered. You shame us with your weakness, another spat. You defend beggars and break the rules. We will not allow it, the third growled. Behind them, a small crowd gathered, curious, eager for conflict. The human stood tall, his hands steady on the counter. He did not raise his voice, but his words carried strength. If kindness is weakness, then I choose weakness, he said. His eyes locked with theirs, gasps rippled through the crowd, whispers surged. The merchants sneered, but their smiles were tight, forced. His defiance had cut deeper than they expected. "You risk your job," one warned, his voice sharp like a blade. "You risk your place in this market. You risk everything for her." The cashier's jaw tightened, but his voice did not waver. "She deserves dignity, and her children deserve to eat," he said firmly. "If that costs me my place here, then so be it." The mother stood frozen nearby, her children clinging to her robe, her heart pounded, her breath shallow. She wanted to speak, to tell him not to risk himself for her, but the words caught in her throat. She had never seen anyone stand so openly against cruelty, never seen someone risk their own future for her. Tears blurred her vision, not of sorrow, but of something she had almost forgotten: honor. The merchant scoffed, stepping back with narrowed eyes. "This will not end here," one hissed. And with that they turned, their cloaks sweeping behind them as they disappeared into the crowd. But the message was clear. The battle was not over, and the human had placed himself in their line of fire. The market buzzed with voices after they left. Some mocked, calling him a fool. Others whispered with awe, saying no one had dared to speak so boldly in years, and hidden among them were softer voices, voices of the poor, voices of the unseen, murmuring their quiet thanks for the stand he had taken. That night, the cashier sat alone in his small room, his heart heavy. He knew his job was in danger. He knew he had painted a target on himself. But when he remembered the way the mother's children had looked at him, eyes filled with trust as if he were more than a cashier, he felt no regret. Perhaps this was what his life was meant to be, not grand, not powerful, but a shield for those who had none. The mother lay awake in her shelter, staring at the cloth she had nearly given him. Her children slept beside her, their breaths soft, their dreams safe for now. Her tears fell silently as she whispered, "Why would he risk so much for us?" But deep inside, she knew the answer. Because some hearts could not bear to watch cruelty and do nothing. The days that followed grew tense. The merchants spoke loudly, spreading lies, painting him as a troublemaker. They told others that kindness would destroy the order of the market, that rules must stand above compassion. But the people had seen his courage, and though many stayed silent, their silence now carried unease, doubt, and hidden respect. The cashier knew the storm was building, yet each time the mother approached, he gave her a nod, calm and steady. It was his way of telling her, "I will not turn back." And she, with tears held back by pride, nodded in return, silently saying, "I will not forget." The choice had been made, the sacrifice already written. He would stand even if it cost him everything, and she would carry his act in her heart, knowing that some sacrifices were not losses, but gifts. Gifts that could light a path through the darkest shadows. The storm the merchants promised came sooner than unexpected. 2 days after the confrontation, the human cashier was called to the back of the market hall. The manager, an older alien with sharp eyes, stood waiting with folded arms. "You've broken rules," the manager said coldly. "Merchants are angry, customers complain. We cannot have trouble here." The human listened quietly, his jaw tight. He knew this was the moment, the cost he had already accepted when he chose to stand up. "I did what was right," he answered calmly. "If that is trouble, then I am guilty." The manager sighed, shaking his head. "You are dismissed. Leave your post." And so, the human walked out of the stall for the last time. His co-workers whispered, some mocking, some silent, none stepping forward. The merchants smiled with victory, their cruelty sharp and proud, but as he stepped into the street, he carried no shame. His hands were empty of work, but his heart was steady with honor. The mother heard the news from neighbors, and her heart sank. Her children asked questions she could not answer. Why would someone lose their place for helping us, they asked. She held them close, whispering softly, because sometimes kindness costs, and brave hearts pay it. That evening, when the market closed and the streets emptied, she gathered her courage. She took her children by the hand and went to find him. She discovered him sitting on a bench outside the quiet stalls, his head lowered, his shoulders heavy from the long day. Her children rushed forward before she could stop them, wrapping their small arms around him. "Don't be sad," they whispered. "You are our hero." The human blinked, surprised, then smiled faintly, his eyes softening. "I'm no hero," he murmured. "I only did what anyone should." But the mother shook her head, her eyes shining with tears. "No, you did what no one else dared. You gave us food, you gave us dignity, and now you've given us hope." For a long time, none of them spoke. They simply sat together under the dim lights, the silence filled with something stronger than words. The merchants had taken his job, but they could not take away what he had built in that small act of courage. In the days that followed, whispers spread again, but this time they carried a different weight. The story of the human's dismissal reached far corners of the colony. The poor spoke of him with gratitude, the children repeated his name with awe, and even some merchants who had once mocked began to question themselves in the quiet of the night. Had cruelty gone too far? Had they lost something greater than coins when they silenced him? The mother worked harder than ever, but now she was not invisible. Neighbors who once turned away now offered small tasks, small trades, and though little, it was enough to keep her children fed. They saw the human walking the streets, carrying baskets, fixing stalls, offering his hands wherever work was found. He was no longer behind the counter, but everywhere, helping quietly, his presence steady, his spirit unbroken. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the colony in gold light, the mother found him again. She carried no cloth, no coins, only her words. "You may think you lost everything," she said softly, "but you gave us more than you know. My children do not speak of hunger anymore. They speak of you, and that means hope lives in their hearts." The human listened, his chest tight with emotion. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of loneliness lift. He had lost a job, yes, but he had gained something greater: connection, meaning. A family of souls who saw him not as a cashier, but as a man who had mattered. The children laughed and played at his feet, offering him small flowers they had gathered from the colony edges. He took them gently, placing them in his pocket as if they were treasures. And in that moment, he realized that sometimes the smallest victories were the greatest. Not in wealth, not in power, but in love, in trust, in the future, carried by two small hands. Weeks turned into months, and slowly the story of the human and the widow became part of the colony's memory. Some still mocked, but others began to act differently. A merchant who once sneered now gave an extra loaf to a hungry child. A neighbor who once stayed silent now offered shelter to a widow. The ripple of one choice had spread, touching hearts quietly, changing the air of the market in ways unseen. The mother's children grew stronger, their laughter returning, their eyes brighter. They would never forget the man who had stepped between them and hunger. And the human, though his hands were still rough from hard labor, walked with a lighter step. He had no title, no stall, no riches, but he had something far greater, a place in their lives, a bond forged in sacrifice, a legacy of hope. One night, as the stars shimmered above the colony, the mother whispered to him, "You didn't just give us food, you gave us tomorrow." And he, with a soft smile, replied, "Then it was worth everything." The shadows of cruelty had tried to break them, but in the end, it was kindness that endured, and in a world filled with hunger and silence, a single act of sacrifice had built a future of hope.